Hello everybody, welcome back for another episode of the Stokes Sound Podcast. I'm your host Ed Stokes, and today, all the way over from Nashville, we have mixing engineer Jon Blass. Jon, how are you doing?
I'm great, Ed. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. For all of the listeners, Jon is an incredible mixing engineer, and I wanted to get Jon onto the podcast because I came across Jon actually on a YouTube recommendation for just mixing, and I saw Jon mix, and I thought he was absolutely incredible. So I wanted to give all the listeners a chance to listen to Jon and Jon's approach to mixing and how he does it all and his tips and tricks and everything. So we'll get into that. But Jon, first of all, if you want to give our listeners a little bit of a backstory of yourself, give yourself an introduction.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. Like you said, I'm here in Nashville, and I am really just a mixer. That's almost 100% of my work at this point is just mixing. And a lot of that is in gospel music, some R&B, some other Christian music. It's kind of, whoever calls me, but it's I've been doing this on my own since 2014. And before that, I was an assistant for a great mixer named John Yash. And I worked with him for a handful of years after college and all that. So that's kind of how I got into this. And I love doing it. I love trying to figure out how to make it all fit and how to make it sound its best. So, yeah.
Every
That's
mix
me.
is like a science. It's like a science project, isn't it? Every time you get a new track in, it's like
it's like a science project without a recipe. Yeah,
there is no right way. But
Yes.
one thing I wanted to chat to you about, Jon, was your kind of mix approach. Because one thing that I found interesting, and I know I mentioned it to you previously, was regarding kind of compression and automation, and you do a wide range of genres, from gospel to R&B, as you mentioned. I mean, if we just kind of start from, I guess, the beginning, if someone sends you a mix, like, I guess, what is your kind of approach, and does your approach change from genre to genre? And if so, kind of what are those changes that you're doing?
Yeah, I would say the approach is largely similar. And my approach always starts with listening to the rough, which is, kind of just the basic, like, let me hear what they're hearing. Let me hear what someone said, hey, let's send this to mix, so that I can hear, hopefully, their intent. And there's times when the rough mix is like, okay, we're never going to turn that on again. And there's times when I'm like, ooh, I got to pay a lot of attention to that, because someone spent a lot of time trying to hone in on what they're getting. And from there, I kind of I try to just trust myself, and I'll start building the track. I usually have everything playing, and then I'll systematically work from the bottom to the top of my session, muting things, and then work my way from the top of the session back down to the bottom, unmuting them. So, at that point, I'm kind of hearing how the mix is built and what's taking up what spaces as I'm pulling things out. And then I usually start getting kind of fundamental sounds: drums, bass, main keys, main guitars, main vocals, up and running, basically. Like, let's work quickly, get to a place where the bulk of the mix is where it needs to be.
Fantastic.
And that, to me, I mean, I don't know. I don't want to get bogged down in this initial thing with a tom fill or bells or even transition sounds, swooshes, that kind of thing. A lot of times I just like the things that are playing the whole song or big chunks of the song or just the chorus. Like, let's get those things in. And hear what the song's supposed to be and how we can fit it together. And then we'll pull the bells and whistles in after the fact. So that's sort of my general approach. After that, there's usually quite a bit of automation. With more pop productions, there's less. But a lot of the times with gospel records, with anything with a lot of live instrumentation, I'm writing, virtually everything, I guess. doing volume automation. For a lot of times, I do a lot of live recordings, and for a lot of those, I mean, before I even have all the parts in, I'm doing automation, because it's not listenable until you do. So it's sort of whatever needs to happen to build the track. And if it's writing the vocal before I even get all the tracks turned on, then we'll ride the vocal before the tracks turned on. Doesn't mean it's going to be the final ride or that things won't change, but um, you kind of got to get the biggest offenders out of the way so that you can hear what the next biggest offender is. So that's sort of my general approach. And it's sort of, it's always zooming in, zooming out, zooming in, zooming out. You got to like hone in on something and then pull back and be like, okay, what is that like in context? What is that like in the song? What is that like with everything else going on? Like, how is that affecting everything? Yeah. So it's a constant challenge of focus and unfocus.
Fantastic. Do you know, I love that you mentioned about the automation stuff. I do feel like now, I mean, that was one thing that I did love about kind of, your work is and you've just mentioned it as well, is kind of the amount of automation you do. And I feel like that's quite important for the listeners that are mixing. I think that mixing is feeling, right? It's all about how that song is felt through. And I feel like that, that's where the automation is so important, because, maybe I don't know, maybe you, John, have a different view on it, but I feel like nowadays with mixing, like you mentioned with like pop records, there is a lot less automation, but I feel like automation is how you're going to get the bigger mixes. Mentioning about compression and if you over compress stuff, you're just making your mixes smaller so you can open it up with more automation. And I love seeing that, because I do feel like these days less and less people are kind of doing automation for whatever reason. Maybe it's kind of a generation thing. Back in the day, everyone would kind of just do automation on absolutely everything. So it's so great to hear someone like yourself say that you kind of do a lot of automation even before, you're, as you mentioned, like doing processing it and stuff. But, when you are dealing, John, with live instruments, say you've got drums, are you automating everything kind of from the drums, or are you even automating the kick drum, or are you using sample replacements to keep it kind of I guess kind of straight, so it doesn't really change much in that sense, and then everything else is automated to that? Does that make sense? Or I'm just trying to
I think that makes sense. There is sometimes drum automation. There's, almost always automation on the cymbals. Sometimes hi-hat, definitely overheads, that kind of thing. Usually I'm not automating kick drums all that much. Hopefully there's
like
some
the foundation.
Yeah, that's the foundation. Some, if there's dynamics, hopefully that's more than just volume. It's also tone and how he's playing it, that kind of thing. There's a huge difference between a light hit on a kick drum and a loud hit turned down. You know what I mean? So I don't want to like, it's usually not just automation on that. And if I'm using samples, there's sometimes elimination of samples or a change of samples, things like that. I will use samples frequently on kicks and snares. It really helps to get the tone and crack that you're looking for, and also help it to punch through. I sort of just treat it like another tool. I treat samples like an EQ. Like, if I want if I want more top end on this snare, maybe EQ is the right thing, or maybe I need to pull in a sample that has the high end that I'm looking for, because it's not in the snare recording, or you turn it up in the snare and it's just hi-hats or whatever it is. So I just treat it, it's never a like, oh, this is a worthless kick drum, like let's just replace it. It's okay, how do I get what I need in this track? And sometimes that's samples, sometimes it's EQ, sometimes it's compression, sometimes it's saturation or distort. Like there's all these tools. Samples are
endless.
Just one. So it's endless. Right.
Do you find that the obviously you're mixing and you're working with different producers and stuff, and do you find, because I know the listeners will ask this, if as a mixer, if you are doing or adding, or in some cases if it's recorded badly, actual full replacement with kick and snare, do you find that the producers know this or can hear this, or do you even tell them, or do you just do what you think's best and send it off as a first run, and or do they?
I never have a conversation with them about that kind of thing. To me, that's I don't know. It's under the hood. They don't need to know. They need to know what it feels like, and if it works, then who cares how we got there? So
amazing.
No, and if sometimes they know, sometimes they might not. I don't. It's not something I talk to them about. And no one's like complaining like, hey, you shouldn't. But if they like the sound, then great. So that's
what I always say. If it sounds good, it is good, right?
Right. Yes, and that's how I think about everything in mixing, right? Like I don't want to like get into the nitty-gritty details of like what reverb I chose on the piano, or like what EQ did you use? Who cares? Do you like how it sounds? Do you like how it feels? Like that's what matters. So yeah,
Joy, it's great you're saying that, Jon, because I feel like so many people kind of overthink what the process is, and I'm sure you found this, but like the best mixes that I'm most happy with is the ones where I've barely touched it, if that makes sense. It's just kind of mixed itself because it's been done well at the source.
Yes.
But as soon as you start overthinking reverbs, delays, and everything, you just go down a road that the mix is going to take a week, right?
Yep. There's times when you got to like really dig into something deep, and also you can't do that on every decision and shouldn't do that on every decision. So don't overthink it. Use the template you have set up so that you don't have to create delay every time you want to delay. Like you're gonna 90% of the time use the same quarter note delay for a basic quarter note delay. It should already be there. Don't overthink it. And then when you need something different, change it. So
It's so true though.
Right.
It sounds so obvious when you say it, but it's so true. And I think all the listeners listening, like you really just, like you say, every track is so different, but a quarter note delay is a quarter note delay, right?
Right. And if it doesn't work, it's way faster to just be like, oh, I don't love that, let's change it or add something to it or swap it out with a different one, than it is to create something new every time. So
So with your kind of mix approach, then, of course, I'm sure it's genre dependent. I mean, if you are, let's say, doing R&B or pop, and you mentioned about more compression or so, do you find as a mixer yourself, are you quite? Again, it all depends on the song, and I'm sure every song changes. But are you quite a heavy-handed kind of compression kind of guy, or do you lean more towards automation, or or no compression?
I would say I don't view them as either or. I am not a heavy-handed compression mixer. I don't know. Some people can compress the snot out of stuff, and they sounds great. When I compress stuff really hard, I'm like, it's killing it for me, and it's not working the way that I want it to work. So I back that off. And I'll smash stuff in parallel sometimes, and I definitely use compression, but I'm not heavy-handed about it. To me, it doesn't do the same thing that automation does. So it's a different animal, right? To me, a compressor, I don't know, like say I'm doing automation on like a main keys, like a piano thing. A compressor will duck down the loud parts and potentially bring up the lower parts, but I don't necessarily need that. I need the parts where it needs to be louder, and the part where it needs to be quieter, and that's all dependent on all the other tracks that are happening and what the pianist is playing there, and that the compressor is not intelligent enough to do. So that's the creative decision making that has to happen, where I'm manually riding that and saying, oh, right here, I want to hear that chord a bit more. And right here, the guitars are kind of taken over, and I don't need all of that. Let me pull that back a little bit. Or
so it's
this
all relative to
lick gets in the way. Right.
Yeah.
It's not just voltage, it's musicality. So so that's why, to me, it's not do you compress a lot or do you do automation? It's how do you use those tools? And to me, that's the biggest difference in how I view automation and why I can't figure out a way to make compressors do that. So,
I
yes.
love that. I love how honest you are. It's so true, though. Do
Yeah.
you find you mentioned a minute ago about parallel compression? I think that's it's funny. I know some mixers that just parallel compress absolutely everything. They just absolutely love parallel compression, parallel distortion. For me, I just find it just makes things louder. But why not just put the volume up? I know, I know that it's a little bit more to it than that. But when you're using parallel compression, what are you in your eyes, what are you trying to? Again, it will depend on the track, but
Mhm.
usually, what are you trying to gain from that? If that what makes you go, oh, okay, I'm going to use a parallel compression on a vocal or whatever it is,
Sure.
or drums. Yeah.
Usually, I guess I would say I'm looking for the energy of big compression, with the natural feel of it. The parallel compression, the way I'm using it, generally brings things forward. Yes, louder, but also not just louder. Like, there's a difference between turning it up 3 dB and parallel compressing it and it being 3 dB louder. Like, it's going to
More
hit
tactile, I guess.
differently. Yeah. It does help with, I mean, especially on a vocal, it helps with things like, lower lines and lower, the pickup notes or the tails of runs, things like that need to stand out. And so we can, actually get there with automation, without, 10 dB rides, things like that. But I'll do it on drums, not necessarily looking for, the low notes to come up, but looking for the energy of the room and looking for the energy of the kit to pop out a bit more. But if I just compress the drum kit without, like, not in parallel, it doesn't react the same way. I lose some of the punch. Like, I like the natural. A lot of times there's nothing on my drum bus. Like, there's processing on the individual tracks, but nothing on the drum bus. Sometimes there is. But doing parallel compression into that, adds a different dynamic.
I would say parallel compression.
Parallel compression going into that bus. Right.
Yeah.
Well, but nothing on, nothing compressing the kit without being in parallel. So I'm still letting kind of raw audio go through, which to me lets the kick and snare do what I need them to do and lets them through and lets their transients out, and that's what I like. So so it's a different tool for different things, and I'll use it sometimes and not always. I mean, pretty much always on a lead vocal. I mean, I did a track a couple weeks ago where I parallel compressed everything, kind of the Andrew Shep's rear bus kind of idea, right? Like, everything was going to it. That's not normally a part of my workflow, but sometimes the song just needs it. And so
just depends what day. Just depends what day it is.
Exactly. It depends what day it is and how I'm choosing to get to where the song is taking me. So yeah.
So when you were doing that parallel compression on vocal, then I'm just curious. I know the listeners would be interested. Are you doing less automation because of the parallel compression? Obviously, the parallel compression is obviously bringing up the lower parts as well. So I guess, are you using that, in both automation and parallel compression, but you're having to do less automation because you're using parallel compression, or does it not really make a difference for you?
I would say it would allow less magnitude of it. Like, I'm not doing less automation. I'm having to push the fader less far, maybe. So I'm still riding the whole vocal, but the parallel sound is part of that vocal that I'm riding. And because it's helping bring up lower level things, I don't have to push the fader all the way to the top to get the tail kind of thing. So and it makes it feel more forward. So even the bottoms of the runs, like, it makes it feel more forward.
Yeah, which is perfect for, like, pop records, where the vocals seems to be more forward than anything,
Well, and honestly, like, I can't think of any record I've mixed where the vocal isn't the thing I want to be forward, right? Like that's
it's the most
that's
important
not
part,
true.
right?
It's not true for every genre, sure. But most popular music, and I say popular meaning, meant for radio in any genre, meant for, people to listen to on mass scale, the vocal is kind of important. And it needs to be heard, and it needs to be forward. So yeah, that's usually the trick, is trying to get everything big and also the vocal big. So
yeah. I mean, a technical question here, but I know that they're going to want to know this. When you're doing parallel compression, do you have like your go-to parallel compressors? And if so, do you tend to have quite a fast release on them? Again, I know it will be song dependent, but just a generalization if possible. Because I know that's going to come up when this is out.
My lead vocal parallel is a 1176, all buttons in, slowest attack, fastest release.
Yeah.
So, turn all the knobs all the way.
Love that.
And that's, to me, has always been a part of how I like vocals. That does change. There are especially songs that don't need to be aggressive, where I will change that or not use it.
Is that changing the attack and release, or is that just changing the compressor, or just not doing
changing the compressor? Changing the compressor.
Okay.
Like, let's try it with an LA2A. Let's try it with a the RVox, or let's try it with anything else. Let's just try it with something.
Is the best plugin. I love RVox.
Let's try it with something that doesn't do the 1176 thing. And get a different tone out of it, because she's singing soft and quiet in this verse, and this just feels like it's right in your face and it's too much, right? Like, there's such a thing as too forward. And so I'll mute it or swap it out with something else for sure.
And do you EQ it on the send as well? So do you EQ your parallel compression? No,
I don't. No. I mean, there's a little bit of EQ prior to the send, but that's a part of the vocal. And then I EQ, like, the raw vocal and the parallel get summed together, and that's where the bulk of the EQ happens.
Fantastic. Yeah.
So it's just part of the sound. Yeah.
And do you and is your process then, I mean, as we're on vocals, is your process the same for the backing vocals as well? Is the same kind of vocal chain? Again, it will depend, but if it's backing vocals, it's kind of doing a similar thing to the lead, and let's say third and fifth harmonies in the choruses, are you processing that in a similar way with parallel as well, or is the parallel the lead?
I'm less likely to use parallel on the background vocals. It's in my template, so I can turn it on quickly. But it defaults to off basically, and the lead vocal defaults to on. I would say so. That's it depends on how they're cutting through and how they what they feel like. But I'm less likely to use it on backing vocals than I am the lead.
But your lead vocal chain is that? I mean, we're probably skipping it because I was going to ask you kind of the way you're setting up. But is your backing vocals, are they all bus to a group, and then you're processing the backing vocals the same as similar to the lead as far as plugins go, but just without the parallel kind of thing, or is it completely different depending on the song?
Kind of. There's definitely some similarities in the plugin chain, but yes, they're bused to their own thing usually, depending on how they act. If they act as a unit, then I will bust them all together and process them similarly. Sometimes the more poppy records will have a slew of different things doing different things, and I don't want to treat them all the same. So they'll be more like, directly out, a choir or a group of BGVs, that kind of thing. I'm usually processing together.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you about the whole harmony and the massive kind of group, backing vocals, because when I did come across the video I mentioned earlier was the automation that you were doing on the vocal bus, but also on the individual tracks as well, which I I think's right, and I love doing that sort of stuff. Basically, you're not lazy when it comes to mixing. It's kind of you go into it in every detail, and I absolutely love that because it's like it's so easy, isn't it, just to put all the vocals in a bus and just ride the bus. But no, you're doing the bus and you're also doing the individual tracks, so certain things can pop out. And do you have like a in your kind of mixing workflow, process of doing that? Is there a certain time where do you automate the bus first and then go into it, individually, or are you?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, sort of this in a similar way to the way I think about like starting the mix, where we handle big things and work our way down to the minutia. Same with a choir or big background vocal. These gospel songs are very background vocal heavy. And so I'll sort of treat that like the lead. Like those are kind of the first things I ride, like the choir and the lead vocal. And then from there we'll work down and be like, okay, but in this section, like I don't even know where the melody is. Like let's find which part's doing the melody and like let's balance that. Or in this section it's sort of like around and we need to kind of like pull them apart a little bit and do different things with them. Or you know what I mean? That's where we can kind of get into, hopefully most of the blend stuff is done before it gets to me. I don't.
Yeah, I was going to say
I don't view my job as a choir director, but there are things that need to come out differently in the mix, and so it's nice to have a little bit of control there. I like to have breakouts of soprano, alto, and tenor, so that we can control them because they'll come out differently in the mix. So yeah.
Yeah, but you show it as well. But you're obviously you've got very good musical knowledge of kind of arrangement as well. I mean, and I feel like that's so important as a mixer, isn't it? Because you've got to kind of know what you're dealing with musically as well as technical, or technical side of it as well.
I think so.
I mean, with your kind of, as we were talking about automation, do you have a fader controller that you're doing your automation on, or are you doing it all with mouse?
I do. Oh okay, no, I'm definitely on a fader. I have the
that sounded like S1. Never with a mouse.
No, never with the mouse. I'll sometimes do send stuff on a mouse, but that would be taxing. No, I have the Avid S1, the 8 fader controller that Avid makes. I had the S3. I paired it down to the 8 channel one when I switched my room up to Atmos. And slimmed some things down a little bit, but I love it. It's a great controller. Does everything I need it to do, and works seamlessly. So yes, I do all the rides manually on real faders.
Yeah, I think that's great though, isn't it, using a real fader? I mean, you just get that. Yeah, as we discussed previously about emotion, you can actually kind of feel it. I feel like when you're using a mouse, it's a bit, I guess, static, isn't it? You don't quite get the flow. You mentioned Dolby Atmos. Can we chat about it?
Yes. Sure.
How's it going for you? Obviously, it's a massive thing at the moment. What's your let's start from the beginning. Kind of talk us through your Dolby Atmos setup, or what you're using, and how you're finding it.
I have a 714 monitoring system in here, all with the Atom A7V monitors, so 11 of those,
amazing,
and then a pair of subwoofers, and I'm using the Matrix Studio as my interface, which is kind of tailor made for a room like this. It can handle all the speaker delays and room equalization, things like that. That's kind of important when you have 11 speakers in a room. So yeah, that's my setup. How it's been going, I've been really enjoying it, to be honest. I think it is a completely different ball game, and everything is hard at the moment because it's new. And that's
I was going to ask you. I'm not quite on it yet.
No, it's a fun challenge, and I love the chance to do it. And I've gotten to work on some records I really loved in it. And I'm excited for the future of it, for sure. So I think it's headed in good directions.
Do you feel like you're kind of going back to square one with mixing in Dolby Atmos, or do you find it's kind of an easy transition from stereo mixing to Dolby Atmos? Or Is it just different?
Both. It's
Both,
different. Yeah. It doesn't feel like square one because you kind of, I mean,
I guess you know what an EQ and a compressor does. So,
you've got experience, and also you're learning an entirely new tool set, and you're learning new plugins, and you're learning new routing, and you're learning new placement ideas, and everything is new, and then trying to translate that binaurally on headphones and in spatial audio for Apple, and it's a lot of things to think about that you don't have to think about in stereo. So it's a fun experience. It's a challenge, and it's also like the chance to do it is really great. I love it. I love being able to mix a record both in stereo and in Atmos. And
what do you prefer?
What do I prefer? Great question.
I've landed you right in it. What do you prefer then?
I think I would say I prefer to mix in Atmos.
Really?
It's just, I mean, it's just such an expansion of your creative tool set.
Yeah.
You can do so many different things that you can't do with two speakers. And though there are lots of challenges with new technology, it's also really, really cool when it's done well, and when the song suits it, and when you're given creative, ability to do it. It's it can be really, really cool and engaging, and that's a lot of fun. So the goal is always like to capture the intent and to like keep the listener engaged and immerse the listener in the record, right? And when you're given an entire room instead of two speakers to do that, it's just a whole different level of being able to engage the listener.
Yeah. Is your kind of workflow of your approach, I mean, I know as you said about experience, but is your approach kind of similar, or is it a completely different kind of way of working, if that makes sense?
Most of the time, I would say at this point, we're having to do the stereo mix first. It's getting approved. Then we're asked to do the Atmos mix. And then, so a lot of times what I've been doing is printing extensive stems from the stereo mix and then importing them into a fresh session and doing the Atmos mix from already baked stems.
Okay.
So in that sense, it's completely different, right? Because you've already mixed the record. You're trying to figure out how to make a stereo record translate well in Atmos. And
that's a good idea, though, taking stems from the stereo mix. That saves time.
Kind of the common practice at the moment. Really, as of right now, the stereo mix is the first deliverable. And the Atmos mix needs to maintain the integrity of the stereo mix. I don't think that'll last, but at this point, that's kind of where we are. And to maintain that integrity and make sure that the client isn't like, wait, what happened to my mix? You want to start from the stereo mix, and you need to constantly reference the stereo mix, and it has to match the stereo mastered file exactly for distribution, things like that. So there's a lot of referencing of stereo that has to happen. So the approach is completely different because there's no two mix, there's no automation, there's no, like, that stuff is, I mean, very little. There's that stuff is already baked in. You did that in the stereo mix. Now how do you expand it? How do you make this feel engaging in an immersive experience? So it's
like mind-blowing, isn't it? It's like endless what you can do.
It is.
So what's your
endless.
views? What's your views then on the future of Atmos? Do you think it's going to be like mainstream like that? I mean, it's already getting there. I know everyone's kind of, as you say, wanting the stereo mix and the Atmos mix. Do you feel like the Atmos is going to take over eventually, or do you think it might just be I don't want to say a phase, but like obviously there's a lot of hype at the moment. Do you think that hype's just going to continue to grow and everyone's going to be doing it, or do you think it's going to be a gradual kind of thing?
I think it's going to be a gradual transition into Atmos only. That would be the goal. and
Yeah, of
I
course.
kind of have faith in that in a few years the ADM wave file will be the deliverable, and stereo will not be as important and be, it'll be folded down from the ADM file.
That'll
That
be a
would
major
be
change.
that would be a major change, and it would
Yeah.
be a lot better process in terms of like, it's kind of really convoluted to mix in stereo, print stereo, and then try to mix it in Atmos. Like, it doesn't. I think it's
Yeah.
going to make a lot more sense to do it more like the film world, where we mix in Atmos and then create the 5.1 and the 2. You know what I mean? Like, I think starting big and folding down is going to be the future. But right now, that's not quite where we are yet. So
I was going to say, it sounds easier to do the opposite of what you're doing. So instead of going from stereo to Atmos, it'd be easier to take an Atmos and, like you say, collapse it to stereo. Kind of seems a bit more, I mean, they're both doable, but that goes on to my next question. How long does it take you on average then to mix a stereo mix to then how long does it take you to mix an Atmos mix? Is there a major time difference, or is it kind of similar? Or, I mean, I know it's new for you, so, maybe it's
there can be.
Yeah.
There can be. There's times when, the Atmos mix takes half as long as the stereo mix, and there's times when it takes twice as long. So I wish I had a clear answer for you. But
how long's a piece of string?
Right. Exactly. It. I would love to say like, oh yeah, I can do 2 a day, like just crank through it, but like that's not the reality yet. And
is that it? I do 5.
Yeah, right. I wish. Yeah, I mean, certainly I'm always trying to improve workflows and be as efficient as I can, because the way to improve creativity is to be efficient and be able to move quickly on all the other stuff. But like I said, everything's still hard. Even to print a file to send to a client. Like, okay, you can print the ADM file in Pro Tools, as long as you didn't use the Dolby Atmos panner. Then you have to commit that first and then print it in Pro Tools. But then to send something that they can listen to on their iPhones, you have to import it into the renderer, then export it out of the renderer as an MP4, and then send it to them with very detailed instructions on how to save it to your phone so that it can play back and make sure that it's playing back in Dolby Atmos, not spatialized stereo. And it's a process, right? Like, everything is hard, but that will get easier and simpler. And I believe this is the worst it'll ever be. So it's getting easier and better all the time.
How long when a client sends you a production for you to mix, how long do you kind of tend to take? I mean, I guess again it obviously depends on each song, but if you were to take an average, how long does a mix take for you?
I try to plan one a day, and I don't work crazy long hours, but I try to plan one a day, and that assumes that I've had the files long enough that my assistant can get them prepped for me, and that things are in good working order when I'm ready to start. And then once it's finished, I'm not having to do deliverables because my assistant will do that too. So so I try to budget one a day, but that isn't from 0 to 100. That's just the mixing part. You know what I mean?
Yeah. If you, what is like your kind of mixing? Because I know the listeners always love to kind of know, like, I guess the life of a mixer in a sense of kind of, what is like a mixing day for you? Do you kind of get into the studio at 9, 10 and then mix till 5? Like, are you, or do you take breaks, that kind of stuff? Because I know some mixers, they take breaks, every hour. Some are like every 2, some are every 3. What's kind of your take on that, for mixing in a day?
I work pretty normal business hours for the most part. I'm usually in the studio by 8:30 in the morning, and work until I got to go pick up my kids from school. And that, I mean, I eat lunch, but I wouldn't say I'm like, oh yeah, I got to take a break. If I got to stand up and take a phone call, I'll do that. It's not scheduled. It's however the day needs to flow. And sometimes that means I'm hopping from session to session to session, doing a bunch of different things. Sometimes that means I'm hyper focused on one thing all the way until lunch, and then, finish it up after lunch. Or, Just depends on the needs of the day for the most part. But a normal day is, by the end of the day, I'm like, all right, cool. I think I'll listen to this in the morning and print it and move on. So yeah, the mix I did yesterday, I need to do a few more things to it, just because I don't know, wasn't completely moved by it yet. So I made some notes for myself, and I'm gonna open up this morning and be like, either I was just in it too deep and it's gonna be like, great, I just need to ride this one section of the audience that I know I didn't do yet, or I'm going to mute everything and try to figure out what's bothering me. So hopefully get it
That's a
turned
good
in,
way
'cause
to
I got
do
another
it.
one to do today. Yeah,
It's a good way to do it, because I feel like, what you mentioned about you working normal business hours, there's this whole thing like, we do ridiculous hours and all of that, but I feel like, like you said, you've got to pick kids up from school. Like when you have like your actual like life, it's kind of like, I feel like you work more productively, whereas if it's like you don't need to be anywhere and you've got whatever time, you end up spending like 2-3 days in a mix. It's just no need. I mean, obviously sometimes there might be, but it's a good way of doing it. So I think for all the listeners that are mixers and doing it, it's good to set yourself kind of end times, or kind of go to a regime like like the business hours or something.
I think so. For me, it's sort of always been my regular kind of thing. I function better during the daytime. I'm a morning person. Like, give me my coffee and let's get the kick drums going. Like I want to mix. Like,
you sound like me.
At night I'm like, man, I'm over it. Like I'm done for the day. I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
So, there's times when I work late and there, that kind of thing happens. But having kids will force your efficiency a little bit and say like, okay, like you got to be focused, because the kids got to be picked up from school and they will wear you down until bedtime. So, I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. So they need a lot of attention at this point. They can't just do things by themselves.
I've got a 1-year-old too, but she's 12 months now. So I know the feeling where it's like, you've got to, you've only got a certain amount of hours in the day before you're back on dad duty.
Yes.
You got to get this work done. But,
you got to get it done. So, and that's just, that's part of life. So, I don't know. That's not something I'm willing to sacrifice just to work 16 hours a day.
And also it's not really,
family life's important too.
Of course, and I'm a big believer, working 16 hours a day, like, let's be honest, you're probably really doing 4 hours of great work. The rest is just, I don't know. Right. When I've done long days of mixing, like really my first instincts in the first 4 to 6 hours was probably the best. The rest was a waste of time, and I made all the changes the following day. So
and it's forced me to really hone in on what is my job and what are things that I don't need to be doing. And let's outsource that stuff. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. If I'm not going to be in the studio in the afternoon, then my assistant Jesse can be in here printing mixes and getting deliverables turned in. I don't need to be doing that stuff. And
that's great. Like,
I don't need to. Yeah. I don't need to open up a session and say, oh shoot, I'm missing audio files, and yikes, these drums are a mess, and like, what are all these things, and what's supposed to be in the session? That can all be done before I need to mix. And so that's, again, something Jesse can open up and be like, hey man, there's something really weird going on with these background vocals. Like, can you take a listen? And then I can call the producer or whatever and be like, hey, what is something's wrong. Let's try that export again or something. So focusing and it honestly, it makes me a better mixer, and also allows me to be a better dad, spouse,
which is the most important
kind of thing too. So,
of course.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, obviously, you're a very established mixing engineer, so you've done it for a long time now. And I know that people listening, if they're just starting out, or they are more experienced, or wherever you are in the mixing game. But Jon, do you find nowadays, obviously you're a well-known mixer, so I assume that you tend to work more label-based more than independent. Is that right? Or you tell me. And so the files tend to be better quality, or less issues with the files, because you're working, I guess, on higher level records, or that kind of stuff, or working with people that are very experienced too, so that obviously helps. Do you find that now compared to when you started out, you're having less issues in that sense, in either the production or missing files or the stuff recorded badly? Or do you find that you're still dealing with this even at a top level, or not?
I would say still dealing with it. I think
Yeah.
eh, definitely I think I'm dealing with fewer amateurs, right? Like fewer people
Of
that just like
course.
don't get it, have never done
Yeah.
it, don't understand the process, and like that can cause a headache in its own right.
Yep.
And also, it's not like I don't work with independent artists. Like I'm working with independents all the time, and a lot of times even the stuff on the label isn't coming to me from the label, it's coming to me from the producer or the artist. And I know it's label associated because of the deliverables. You know what I mean? So it's just
Yeah.
I don't think too differently about the label stuff versus independent stuff. It's
Yeah,
a
that's great.
project is a project, and usually I'm answering to the producer and artist anyway. Sometimes A&R is involved, sometimes they're not. So yeah, I don't yes and no. I do get horrible files from label projects at times, and I sometimes get unbelievably good files from complete independents that I've never heard of before. It totally depends. So
Totally
yeah,
depends. Yeah.
totally
That's great though,
depends.
because
And
it just means it's not done by whether someone's on a label or someone's not. It's just, it is what it is.
yeah,
If a production's good,
yes,
it's good, and if it's not, it's not. But
yep.
that's great.
I used to think
Yep.
that all my headaches came because I had just, I was working with nobodies. And man, if I could just work with the established people, like you would have time before deadlines and things would come in as expected and invoices would get paid on time. And like, it's a mess at every level, I think, at some degree. So yeah. And I mean, at the high levels, you're dealing with, this needs to be turned in yesterday and we don't like anything, and we need you to mix it tomorrow, but we haven't cut the lead vocal yet, and like that stuff
Yeah.
happens. That stuff happens.
It's great to
So
hear that, because
yeah,
it is great to hear that, because I feel like when
is it?
when you're starting out, and especially the really young people that are starting out, I feel like there is this kind of thing of, oh, you're working with so and so, it must be a nice easy ride because you're getting great files. But it is, I feel like in any level wherever you're at, there is always positives and there's always negatives, I guess. So
Yes.
it just goes to show that it doesn't matter who you're working with. It's all about the music at the end of the day, and making things sound good. But that's interesting. So I mean, how if we can, I know we're coming up to the end, but I just kind of wanted to just you mentioned at the start of the podcast that you started going full time or not full time, working for yourself. Was it in 2014? Was that?
Yeah, that's correct.
So how for the mixers? I mean, how have you found kind of, I guess, transitioning, going from having a mentor? I mean, I guess you always have a mentor or someone you look up to, but how's it kind of been for you, kind of going completely like on your own, making all your own rules and everything? How have you found that?
That's a hard transition to make. It is,
Yeah.
and I don't feel that anymore, but at the time it was it was scary, to be honest. Like, how do you make that jump? And
you got to just do it, right? Just got
you'd
to
have to. And I mean, at some point it a little bit feels like the golden handcuffs, right? Like, I got a great gig. Like, who has essentially a kind of a full-time gig as an mixing assistant? Like, it was great. And he was doing great work, and I felt like I had good relationships through that. And also, no one gets into this to be the assistant forever, and it was time. And so I took a gig that I thought was going to be, I mean, I couldn't take the gig if I was going to keep my job, and I thought it would be a great way to leave the nest, as you say. And of course, that gig fell through, so I was just scrambling for a bit. But word traveled, and the connections that I had made as an assistant began to trickle to me a little bit. Lower budget things, or somebody just believed in me and gave me a shot or whatever. And the transition to getting my own work happened, thankfully, pretty quickly. So, yeah.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
And I always say, what's meant to be will be, right? It's kind of just with this kind of being your own kind of, I guess, self-employed. And most mixers, you don't work for like a company. You do your own thing, and people know it's building up connections and stuff like that. And you just kind of, some people have a slow, I guess, transition, and other people just happens quick. So anybody listening, it just goes to show that obviously Jon's been very successful since going out on his own. But it's a ride, I like to call it, right? it's
a ride. Yeah.
It's a
and
ride.
You plan it the best you can, and you use your downtime as wisely as you can, and that's kind of what you got to do. But thankfully,
and you're in Nashville,
it does help. Yeah.
Great area for music.
Yes, it is. And thankfully, while I was wishing I had mixed gigs, I was, assisting some tracking sessions at studios and had some random gigs here and there that I was doing and getting experience that I didn't have before. And that's incredibly valuable too.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's so much stuff in audio. There's, like you say, recording gigs, assisting gigs, mixing gigs. So there's all sorts of stuff, and it does take time to build up. But when you do, it's amazing. But Jon, that kind of leads into a last question that I wanted to ask you, and I ask this question to everybody that comes onto the podcast, and the question is what 3 things do you know now that you wish you knew when you started out? It's a tough question.
I have listened to your podcast, and I knew that question was going to come, and I still forgot to plan for it. What 3 things do I wish I knew then
when you
that
first
I know
started
now?
out? Yeah,
when I first started. I think I really early, when I was starting college and things, I think I wish I understood that this is not a gig where you get a job. I haven't had a job ever, right? I've always been self-employed. So
it's the best way.
Constantly, it can be. It has its advantages.
Yeah,
but there's no such thing as paid time off. There's no such thing as a 401k match. There's no such thing as, just someone else handling responsibilities. There's, it's all you. And I have been fortunate enough in the past few years to bring on an assistant, which, is kind of a contract-based thing, but he does great work for me. And I have management now, and that really helps offload some things too. But ultimately this is me and my business, and a business degree might have been more useful than a music degree. I'll be honest. But I don't think I knew that when I was 18. I think I thought, oh, cool, I'll go to college and get a job just like everyone. And the reality is you go to college and they're like, cool, good luck. And you have to go build your own career. And it's a different animal. And I don't know how I would have done things differently based on that information, but I think it's a concept that I didn't know and didn't really fully grasp, right? I didn't grow up in music. I didn't grow up in Nashville. This wasn't my reality. And so I think that would have been good to know at 18. What else? I think I wish I would have known the importance of relationship building. This is not, you have to do the work, right? You have to actually be good at this because there's a million other people that could do it too. But relationships are crucial. And relationships to get work, but also relationships of peers, colleagues. When you are in your mix room by yourself trying to figure this out, you grow slowly. When you are in relationship with other people that are doing the same thing, you grow more quickly. You have better ideas. You know how they're handling their stressful issues, their relationships with clients, their mix tweaks, their tubas, like whatever it is. You can, that's crucial. So
I think some people think that management will just give them all the work.
No,
but it's not. It's not the case.
Anytime you talk with a manager, they will be very explicit that their job is not to get you work. Their job is to manage your work. And
exactly.
And that's true, right? They can bring in other relationships and hopefully will, but that's not their job. Their job is to manage your work. So Johnny, my manager, has stepped into my business and built relationships with my clients, and he's introduced me to some people that he knows from his world. But his primary gig is scheduling, logistics, invoicing, helping me build my career, and managing.
I'm so glad you
my
said
work.
all that, because I feel like all the listeners listening, like, don't think that just getting a manager is going to give you the work, because as Jon said, it's not true. it's
not true.
It's not true
at any level. So their connections can be beneficial, but that is not a reason to pay a manager, because that's not their gig. So that's 2. Let's see, 3.
Last one.
Man, I think I would tell myself to just be open to things you don't know. I think, and some people are more like this than others, but I have a tendency to be pretty skeptical of people, plugins, software, like whatever. I'm like, prove it. and I think that there's an openness that helps in creative workflows, and that's something that I've been learning over a decade. And I mean, that also is, I think I would have been in Atmos 2 years earlier had I been a little stronger in that way, because I saw it and I was like, neat. You know what I mean? Like, and then it wasn't until I don't know, a year or 2 after that I was like, I feel like this might turn into something. This is starting to intrigue me. And so, I don't know, openness, like try new things, explore all the awful things that are on YouTube and all the great things that are on YouTube, and try them out and see what works and what doesn't. And
knowledge is power.
Knowledge is power. And it's the only way you're going to find your own voice, right? Like, otherwise you're just, I don't know, you're going to stumble upon what works for you and what speaks to your ears. And so, I would say that's my number 3. Just be open.
Fantastic.
Be open to all ideas and try everything.
Love that. Well, you answered those questions perfectly well, like you planned it all.
I wish I had.
It was perfect. Well, Jon, thank you so much. Any of the any social handles you want to say on here, your Instagram or anything, they will obviously all be below for any of the listeners. If you want to, hire Jon to mix your records. But Jon, feel free to give any social media handles or anything, your Instagram. Feel free to mention it if you want to.
My website is jonblass.com, and my Instagram is Jon Blass, JONBLASS. And that's pretty much all I do is Instagram. Who's on Facebook anymore, right?
Exactly.
So that's kind of, that's me. Yeah. But yes, fantastic. My email is on my Instagram and my website. Like, I'm available. So yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Jon, thank you so much for coming on to this episode. We're super lucky to have you on. And thank you.
Thank you. Glad to be here.